All right, welcome everybody. We're going to get started. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar on mobile secondary market insights. My name is Melissa Geringer. I oversee communication for bstock and will be serving as moderator for today's discussion. As we get into the webinar, please feel free to use the portal on your screen to send in questions via the Q&A tab on your toolbar, and we'll plan to do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. With that, I'd like to welcome our host, Joe Dube. Joe works with some of our largest mobile sellers and buyers, providing them data and insights in order to optimize the experience across our network of mobile marketplaces. And I'll go ahead and hand it off to you, Joe.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, looking forward to walking through some data with everybody over the next half hour or so. So what we're planning to do is share some market data, what we're seeing in the secondary market. We'll do a walkthrough of what a B2B auction marketplace looks like and sort of what to expect both as a buyer and a seller. And then we'll discuss some condition grading. That's a hot topic that we often are advising our sellers on what to do and hear a lot of feedback from the buying community on that condition grading as well. So excited to dive right in. And with that, we will hit the next slide. So the mobile secondary market, let's talk a little bit about the size of it. So this used smartphone market is growing a lot faster than the overall smartphone market. So we've seen over the past couple of years that primary market of phones is really slowing down, but the secondary market is really ramping up. I think back, a couple of years ago when, I guess it's probably closer to 4, 5, 6 years ago, when the carriers were subsidizing your latest smartphone. When the iPhone was being released, it was coming out at $649, but consumers weren't actually paying that amount. They were paying closer to $200 and locking themselves into a 2-year contract. So a lot of people didn't even realize the value of the devices they had. But now that transition has really happened to have the carriers moving away from that subsidy, a lot of people are paying full price or paying a monthly fee for their phone. And the trade-in has really become an essential part of that transaction. It's seen as both a marketing expense and a way to get people into the stores and trade in and trade up to the latest models. So a lot of those devices that had previously just sort of ended their life in a desk drawer somewhere are now being traded in at the carriers or the manufacturers, and they find a second home. So we've seen this data is coming from IDC, a global research firm, and over 176 million used phones were sold in 2018, and that's only expected to grow further. So by 2023, they're expecting to see over 333 million devices with a total resale value of $67 billion. So a huge market here, growing really fast. That bullet point there towards the bottom is talking about the average phone being used by 2 to 3 people. It's actually climbing from there. So the new iPhones that are coming out are retailing at over $1,000, and those will have 3 to 4 owners over their lifetime. It's not something where people are buying devices and using them once and then they're never being used again. They're getting traded in and bought and sold multiple times. So let's dive over to a look at sort of where that commerce is happening. So where does the mobile secondary market exist? So there's a big direct-to-consumer piece where there's people who are both trading, they're going to be retail-ready phones, right, on those B2C marketplaces, eBay and Amazon. So those devices are going to typically be small to medium sellers that are fully functional. And there's also some dedicated mobile marketplaces like Swappa and Backmarket, where a lot of that B2C or C2C transactions are happening. Another place that these phones end up are being remanufactured or being held for insurance obligations. So when someone cracks their phone and gets a replacement phone, that replacement could very well have been a trade-in from another customer. There's a big wholesale market out there as well. A lot of direct sales. Sales are happening on LinkedIn, they're happening on WhatsApp, they're happening via email and trading spreadsheets back and forth. And just a big wholesale network has been built out over the past 5, 10, 15 years. And then the last option here is the B2B Marketplace, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. And that's really where bstock fits into the ecosystem. And we host marketplaces for large sellers, the two large carriers in the United States, some retailers, some wholesalers, and some manufacturers. So later in the presentation, we'll take a look at what that site and B2B Marketplace looks like. But before we do that, let's take a look at some of the pricing trends that we've witnessed. So bstock is in a unique position where we're able to get a view of pricing through the secondary market because of all of the sellers that are on our platform. So this isn't data from a specific seller or buyer or a specific transaction. This is tens of thousands of transactions that are happening across the network, and they are really fueling this data and allows us to see what's going on. So here we're looking over the last 6 months. These are our top sellers. The iPhone 10, iPhone 8 Plus are both 2 generations old. The iPhone 7, 7 Plus are 3 generations old. And those are typically the sweet spot for the secondary market, those devices that are 2 to 3 years old, because those are the ones that are being traded in the most quantities as people buy the new generation. So a couple things to point out here on the pricing trends. If you take a look at the iPhone 10 graph in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see August to September was pretty flat. And then September through November, we see some pretty steep declines. And that's obviously attributed to the iPhone 11 announcement that happened towards the end of September, and a lot of those phones are shipping out in October. So that really impacts the secondary market and the value of those most recent devices more drastically than those older devices. You'll see the 7 and 7 Plus graphs are more gradual and standard depreciation each month rather than a sharper decline in those months around the event. The other thing to note here is that flattening out in November, December, January. So after the market sort of settles down and understands what was released and where the prior generations fit in and where they're being priced, we actually saw some slight upticks on a couple different models, conditions. You can see on that iPhone 10 from November to December, the B grade actually climbed up a little bit. By January, it was back down to about $348. But it's interesting to see those trends of that steeper depreciation during the event and then the flattening out towards the end of the year and beginning of 2020. So what other key takeaways did we see when we're looking back on the last quarter of 2019 and the first part of this year? So as I mentioned, that depreciation on those top Apple smartphones from September to October was rather steep. It was at 14.3%. And that also sort of led to us taking a deeper look at the most recent model before the 11, which was the 10S and the 10S Max. And when we looked at how those were performing compared to other models at the same time in their life cycle, about 14 months after their release, we saw that they were doing worse. And why is that? A lot of that has to do with the iPhone 11 being released at a lower price point. It came out at $699. The iPhone 10s, 10s Max were at $999 plus, and the iPhone 10R, which was the cheaper option at the time, was priced at $749. So by introducing a brand new iPhone 11 that undercut the 10R price and had comparable functionality to the 10s and 10s Max, that really impacted the pricing of those most recent models. So we saw them coming in at around 39 to 44% of their original retail price, when typically at that 14 months post-release, we're seeing iPhones in an A-B condition just over 50% of their original retail. Another interesting data point that we see and is fairly consistent quarter over quarter is the average delta between the ASPs of different condition grades within the same model. So if I looked at an iPhone 10 between A grade, B grade, C grade, D grade, what's the average delta between those condition grades? And that comes in right between 10 and 11%. So on average, that's the premium people will pay for getting that A grade versus B grade. Um, and that's fairly consistent no matter sort of what's happening to overall pricing. That delta between grades sort of holds in that 10% ballpark. And the last point here on this slide that I'd like to touch on before we hop over and take a look at an actual B2B auction marketplace is just sort of what I referenced earlier, is that price flattening out from November to December. And us sort of gathering the data there, it looked just about like a 2.1% depreciation across those top Apple smartphones. And that's what we see in a steady state environment. That's what I typically expect of a 2 to 4% depreciation per month. So with that, let's take a look at what a B2B auction marketplace looks like. What we've set up for you today is a demo site. So this isn't a live auction for any specific seller, but it looks like a lot of the sites that we run. So what you'll see is here, this is the screen that shows the gallery of images for the auctions that are live. We have 8 example auctions up, but these are very representative of what actually is being auctioned off through the bstock platform. You'll notice here that there's a variety of lot sizes, a variety of conditions, and a variety of categories. So on the lot size end, you'll notice some lots here have 41 units, some are at 467, others are at 904. So that's a fairly typical spread. Depending on the marketplace you're purchasing from, you'll see lots ranging from on the low end from 20 to 40 to the high end of 1,000 plus, and then everything in between. And the other point here we can take a look at is what the current bid is, the average cost per unit, the number of bids, and when it closes. So we're really bringing transparency to this transaction. So at a glance, you can see all of the key metrics before you dive in further. So to see any of the additional details that have to do with this auction, what you'll have to do is log in. So every single buyer that is registered on the bstock network is a business buyer. So this is not a consumer-facing network. These are all active registered businesses that have provided the correct documentation to our team, leading to an approved registration. And if you are registered and approved for a specific site, you can get access to the further details around the actual manifest that you can come down and download into Excel. There's further details related to the shipping in terms of the weights and DIMs that will be populated, payment information, shipping information. All of this you can click into and really understand exactly what you're buying. And again, it offers that transparency so that the buying community can bid aggressively, knowing exactly what they are in for and what to expect on the next steps. So if I take a look at the top here, you'll notice that there's a couple of different categories that I can click on. One is fairly interesting to some of our sellers is R2 only, which is the responsible recycling standard. It's a certification that different processing facilities or buyers will go through to ensure that they know how to properly handle certain focus materials and recycle all types of electronics, as well as do a secure and complete data wipe of any consumer information that's on those devices. So if there are certain groups of inventory that a seller has that can only go to a specific buying group, the bstock platform can accommodate that. And if I click over to the R2 only if I'm an R2 buyer will I even see this inventory. So there's ways to sort of segment out your buyer base to get only the correct inventory in front of those that are able to actually purchase it and handle it correctly. If I transition back to the overall gallery page, there's a couple other things that I want to walk through before heading back and talking more about conditioning. One of the views that our bigger buyers will use, especially on larger sites, is list view. So this allows them to see all of the live auctions on a single page and place their bids here along each line item. It's a lot quicker. You can see it's lit up in green if I'm winning. It's lit up in red if I'm losing that auction. So it's a really quick and easy view to do bidding in bulk. And a lot of our larger buyers appreciate that, especially on sites that we're running for those carriers that may have hundreds and hundreds of auctions that are closing on one day. They don't need to go through the grid view and look at each of the stock images. They're much more comfortable going into list view, understanding exactly when each auction closes, seeing the units, understanding the carrier grade, and placing their bid. So with that, we'll click into one of these iPhone auctions and just take a further look at the grading. So you'll notice the grade is right there in the title. It's available in the downloadable manifest. If there were any mixed condition auctions, we typically steer towards single model, single condition auctions. But each auction page will also have a link to that seller's specific condition descriptions. And we always advise that buyers really get familiar with these descriptions before purchasing. So you can see in this case, they're describing, in this example, C grade as scratch and dent. And there's some more details here associated with that. So all sellers and processors are handling conditioning a little bit different. So there may be some nuances there, but there has been a push towards standardization. So I think that's a good segue to head back to the presentation and take a look at the universal conditioning. So the CTIA is an industry group, and they've been working over the past year or so with a lot of different stakeholders, everyone from the carriers to different third-party processors. We have some representation on that board of going over and publishing a document that everyone can agree on and move towards so that we're all speaking the same language. I remember several years back, a lot of phones were just described as powered up good LCD. And I see some of that still out there in the market, but we find that that's really just not good enough. A lot of our sellers are making the push towards getting this full CTIA document involved in their processing, and everyone sort of makes it their own and has a different version, but it's all in the same language. You can see here, I've taken a snippet from the document. This table is showing the cosmetic condition grades, A through E, with an N meaning not graded. So everyone's sort of familiar with this style, but I think a lot of people had previously said, oh, my C has cracks or my C doesn't have cracks. Now I think getting on the same page and having this universal conditioning that multiple people are coming together and working on is great for the industry and makes that buying process so much more transparent. If you're a seller and are able to go towards this standard, you're going to have buyers that don't have to make multiple test buys and really see what your inventory is like and what the yield turns out to be. They can bid confidently right from the get-go. So our sellers always ask us, Joe, is it going to be worth it for me to do better on grading? I agree that it would be awesome if we could all be moving towards this standard, but I have to invest real dollars here to do some additional processing. Am I going to actually see more dollars on the back end? And the answer is yes. So time and time again, we've seen this happen with sellers as they get more efficient and more consistent with their grading. They actually make more money. So this is an example up on the screen now where you're seeing the impact to pricing of moving from a prior 3-tier grading scale that was very opaque. A lot of the A, B, and C language was very similar. Buyers had a hard time of understanding what exactly was the difference between A, B, and C. And they had C basically acting as their catch-all. And this seller was somewhat hesitant to move towards that CTIA grading standard. But what they found is after they did it, by the 4th month, they were getting more for their D grade inventory than they were previously for their old C. So this goes to show that you shouldn't necessarily be scared of calling something a C or a D and think that, oh, that's going to cost me more money. It's really all about consistency and meeting expectations. So by moving towards this stricter grading policy, A through D, that was very similar to the CTIA standard, they actually found that the D grade was performing better than the C grade previously was. When they first launched, both the old C and the new C were very similar, and the D lagged behind. But as buyers got their hands on this inventory and really understood the new grading structure and tiers, they came back and bid more aggressively. And overall, in aggregate, this seller ended up making more money for the same inventory by being better at grading and moving towards that standard. So it looks like we're right about 23 minutes in or so. We're targeting to have this wrap up in about a half an hour. So I'm just going to sort of wrap things up on a conclusion slide here, and then we will open it up to Q&A. And I look forward to answering some questions from those of you who have joined the webinar. So overall, what do I want to leave you with? The amount of trade-ins is going to continue to grow. So as I talked about when we were first kicking off, we see that trade-in as an essential part of the purchasing of a new device. And everyone is really trying to get in more aggressively to the trade-in game. The value of those units traded in is going to continue to increase as well. Sort of imagine, looking back and thinking that, oh, that $649 iPhone is really expensive when it first came out. Now, it seems like a deal that they're talking about, that the iPhone 11 came out at $700 and the iPhone 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max are well over $1,000. So there's a ton of value left in these devices, even after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of use. And they're going to continue to see multiple owners before that device ends up being recycled at the end of its life. And the last point here is that we expect to see more and more companies really move to a B2B sales channel. As the volume increases in the secondary market, this channel allows for transparency in the transaction. There's no shady wholesale direct emailing spreadsheets. It's very clean, it's very transparent, and it allows buyers to have access, fully vetted business buyers to have access directly to the source of inventory. So I think it's a pretty exciting space to be in. And with that, let's open it back up for questions.
Thanks so much, Joe. That was great. And thanks to everyone who submitted questions. We'll take a few minutes to answer them. So first up is, can you talk a little bit about the manufacturers and retailers you work with and where we can access their marketplaces?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll switch back over really quick. So the bstock homepage is here at bstock.com. If you click on the marketplaces tab, you'll see all of the different private marketplaces we run. And a lot of those are going to be not in the cell phone category. But If you're interested specifically in mobile devices, you can filter on cell phones here. And you'll see a lot of generically branded marketplaces, but don't be fooled. Those are actually real big businesses behind there. So the wireless network marketplace, if you click into any of these and look at the terms and conditions, you'll see who the actual seller is. This one is Bell Canada, one of the three major carriers up in Canada. Superior Wireless Auctions is T-Mobile here in the United States. Select Mobile Auctions are auctions directly from Samsung. Mobile Carrier Liquidations is the AT&T marketplace. So you'll see the mobile carrier AT&T, Superior Wireless is T-Mobile, Wireless Network Marketplace is Bell up in Canada. Select Mobile is Samsung, and then we have GameStop, which is a well-known retailer. They take a lot of trade-ins at all of their physical locations, and a lot of those traded-in devices will end up on the bstock platform. And then it's sort of rounded out here by some wholesalers, Alltech, Early Upgrade, and Clover Wireless. So take a look at each of those. You can apply, and once you're approved for one of the marketplaces, getting approved for others is a fairly quick process.
Great, thank you. All right, next question that came in. Where do the majority of these phones end up, and have you seen that shift over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if I rewind 5 years or so, a lot of the volume was just going straight to Hong Kong. That's still a very big player in the wholesale market, but we have seen a lot of diversification recently. So we have tens of thousands of buyers from all over the globe. And that's one of the real advantages of a B2B marketplace is you're not relying on a small group of buyers to sell product through. You have that diversity of thousands of buyers located in all different areas of the globe. So we've seen Dubai really grow significantly over the past year or two. We're seeing a lot of phones actually stay domestic in the United States as consumers are more and more willing to explore options of owning a used device rather than only looking at the new devices from their carrier or manufacturer. So yeah, the answer is we see thousands of buyers across the globe. Hong Kong's still a big player, but it's certainly not the same share that it used to be.
Great. Next question. You mentioned R2 certification. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the impact R2 is going to have just moving forward?
Sure. So it's one of the ways that sellers really helps them vet the buying community. So the R2 certification process is fairly robust and expensive, to be frank. So it's not an easy certification to come across. Last time I checked, I think there's about 850 R2 certified facilities across the globe. But what that's ensuring for the seller is that that buyer knows how to handle all of these devices. They will ensure a data wipe, and it just sort of gives some further legitimacy and credibility to that buyer if you are R2 certified. So I think in terms of an impact, being an R2 certified facility certainly gets you the most access to the most amount of inventory. And I think will let you ramp up as a significant buyer on some of these marketplaces more quickly. It's an interesting conversation. Some people don't like it, others do. But I think if you're looking to purchase in bulk directly from the major sources of inventory, it's an important thing to look into and move forward with.
Great. And I know we're at 30 minutes. I did have another question actually related to coronavirus and how that had an impact. We know it had an impact on the supply chain, but how have you seen that affect the mobile secondary market, and what is the outlook for mobile sellers and resellers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, it's been dominating the news. It's one of the reasons that we're on this webinar today. We would have loved to meet a lot of the attendees in person in Barcelona, but obviously that Mobile World Congress event was canceled this year. So clearly, the coronavirus is making an impact across the globe. But what we see specifically on bstock marketplaces is actually it's actually pretty quiet in terms of there's hasn't been any drastic swings in pricing. And I think that just goes back to that diverse, broad buyer base, that you're not relying on a single buyer to take a majority of your inventory. And I think, yes, we may have seen some softness in Hong Kong, but that leads other geographies, gives them an opportunity to purchase in a bigger way. So across the bstock network, pricing has been just sort of as expected during this time of the year. I haven't seen a major drop due to any specific that I can tie back to the coronavirus itself.
Great, thank you. And then we had one more just come in, so I'm going to let you tackle that and then we'll wrap it up. So are there plans to add additional grading detail to capture defects or cost of repair?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we're always looking for ways to create a very transparent buying opportunity for the community. So we work directly with our sellers and advise them to provide as much detail as possible on the auctions, so that buyers can bid aggressively and confidently, knowing exactly what they're purchasing. So yeah, I think we're in the business of transparency, and any further details about a specific auction lot, the better, more the better.
Super. All right. And with that, I would like to say thank you to you, Joe. Great job. And thank you to everyone who attended today. We really appreciate it. We'll plan to send a follow-up email to everyone with the presentation included. You can expect that later today. And if we didn't get to your question today, feel free to respond to that email. Respond with your question in that email we send out, and we'll get it answered. And you can also email our customer support team, cs@bstock.com. Anytime. Thanks again, everyone, and take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.